Friends, we start where we left off in the last broadcast, Revelation 18. Notice the great system described here in verse 3. Now, we just read about Tyre. Now we're reading about this great false religious system in the book of Revelation. And after these things I saw another angel, verse 1, come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So obviously, Babylon is ultimately destroyed. Another term used for the great Roman religious political system that sits in Europe. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. For the first time ever, when the Pope arrived here, first time ever, an American president met him at the airport. That's never happened before. You don't want to, as it were, diss the Pope. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Sounds a lot like Isaiah 23, 1, 3, and 8. Verse 15, the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off when she's destroyed, for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. The whole world will one day be absolutely shocked and astonished that the greatest economic system, religious and political and military as well, will be destroyed. People don't particularly care when armies are destroyed. Most people don't believe their religion that much. So when a religion is destroyed or another one created, well, that has a certain effect. When people lose goods and services, go hungry, now you've got another thing coming. People are terribly, terribly shocked at this point. And now also verse 23, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in you, this final religious system, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in you. For your merchants were the great men of the earth. For, or it could probably better be translated by, for by your sorceries, were all nations deceived. Now, all nations deceived by a merchant system called the Mart of Nations, affects the whole world, and when it's destroyed, everyone's in shock. This is not like anything the world has ever seen before. Ezekiel chapter 26. Now, if you have time, you can read Ezekiel 26, 27, and 28. We'll read part of 26. Verse 3. Now, verse 2 talks about Tyrus. Tyrus is spoken against Jerusalem, and so forth. Verse 3, therefore thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Tyrus, and will cause many nations to come up against you as the sea causes his waves to come up, like a giant tide. God uses that analogy to describe how he's going to destroy Tyre. Verse 4 talks about that, and you come to verse 12, and they shall make a spoil of your riches and make a prey of your merchandise. Again, just describing this tremendous economic power that a revitalized Europe will bring. And the men of the East, of course, prophecy shows, will feel threatened, and they'll react. They shall break down your walls and destroy your pleasant houses. And they'll lay your stones and timber in the dust in the midst of the water. That's total destruction. Verse 16, then all the princes of the sea shall come down from their thrones and lay away their robes and put off their broidered garments. They shall clothe themselves with trembling. Verse 17 and so forth. They shall take up a lamentation for you and say to you, how are you destroyed? that were inhabited of seafaring men, the renowned city, which was strong in the sea, she and her inhabitants, which caused their terror to be on all that haunt it. Verse 19, for thus says the Lord God, when I shall make you a desolate city. We read about this in Revelation 17. You put it together with Isaiah 23, Revelation 17, Ezekiel 26. It's obvious that this great system, headed by a city in the sea that affects the whole world, is destroyed, but only after it's brought this astonishing prosperity to the world. Of course, the world right now, because the economic global village, as it's been called, is certainly trembling, no doubt about that. The great, in quotes, of this world are wrestling with what to do about it, how to save airlines, save banks, save financial institutions, and of course, if people want to be elected, how to save jobs. And a lot of people are watching what's going on in a way that I've never seen before. When I shall bring you down with them that descend into the pit, that's an interesting statement, verse 20, with the people of old time, and shall set you in the low parts of the earth, in places desolate of old, them that go down to the pit, that you be not inhabited, and I shall set glory in the land of the living. I'll make you a terror, and you shall be no more. Though you be sought for, people will want this great system back, yet shall you never be found again, says the Lord God. So in a nutshell, this great system will rise one more time and be destroyed completely, never to be found again because Christ returns. Chapters 27 and 28 continues this lamentation. Incredible just how people cry over the destruction of this system. It grows so great. Now, God has used ancient Tyre as a clear type of this coming system, modern Europe, to emerge as what the book of Revelation calls Babylon the Great. The European economic community is just the first step. Maybe in a way you'd almost call it a stepping stone to political and military unity. The Christian Science Monitor in about 1985 wrote this. There's a quote. Professor Walter Hallstein, former German president of the European Economic Community, and his colleagues are not just building a comfortable trading area. I continue the quote. They are building a new empire, a new political power, a new federation, a new political force big enough to challenge the United States and Canada. Now, they didn't realize in the 1980s that the men of the East, who eventually send an army of 200 million, would threaten them as well. But the statement, the quote, speaks for itself. Now, I've talked a lot about harmonizing, Daniel 2 and 7 and Revelation 13 and 17. The final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire is represented in biblical language as the 10th horn or king of the fourth beast of Daniel 7. If you want to just look up the verses, Daniel 7, verses 7, 17 to 20, and 23 and 24. That's the same as the 10th horn on the 7th head of the beast of Revelation 13:1. I've covered that in such detail, and we have it in booklets that I have to keep moving. If you go to Revelation 17 and verse 11, verse 10 says, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. That was written from the perspective of the 1930s and early 40s. That's the only time that it could apply. It has to be speaking to an individual who would understand, who would look and understand in the 1930s or early 40s the truth of this chapter. Somebody on earth in that period had to be, that period, would be the one who would understand it. Nobody else could understand how 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. If it was after 1945, when Hitler and Mussolini had fallen, it would say 6 are fallen and 1 is yet to come. If it was before Hitler and Mussolini, it would say 5 are fallen and 2 are yet to come, of the 7 resurrections of the Holy Roman Empire. Just keep that straight in your mind, and it will help you realize that anybody who understands a little bit about this prophecy would recognize they ought to go looking in the 1930s and 40s for somebody somewhere who was explaining that the United States of Europe would rise again. There's only one man doing that. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. The final resurrection would last for a very short period of time. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth and is of the seven and goes into perdition. Now, very quickly, let me just explain that. He's called the eighth, but he's of the seven. So he's sort of the same and sort of different. How do you understand that? The way you get to 8 is the Chaldean Empire, the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar was 1. The Medo-Persian Empire was 2. 3, 4, 5, and 6 were the 4 divisions of the Greco-Macedonian Empire when Alexander the Great died and his empire split 4 ways under his 4 greatest generals. All of that's been covered. It's in my book on the beast. Number 7, the Roman Empire up to AD 476. That's the 7th beast. Well, that was followed, 476, by what's called the transitional period to AD 554, when the deadly wound had been given, when the Vandals, Heruli, and Ostrogoths from the north, the Germanic tribes, had overrun Rome. 554, Justinian rose, became the first of the 7 resurrections of the Holy Roman Empire, with the previous time that the Roman Empire existed is simply the Roman Empire. Always the Pope is now involved and crowned the 7 heads. So the beast of Revelation 17, which has 7 heads, and we would say 6 are now fallen and the other is not yet come, is the 8th beast. 7th head of this 8th beast has 10 horns, which are identified as 10 contemporaneous kings, right there in verse 12. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. They still have to come. But they receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. All right, they give their power to the beast. They sort of rule with him, but under him, for a very short period of time, just prior to Christ's return. Verse 14, because they shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he's the Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Might be important for all of us to understand exactly what this system is, because if you are one of God's servants, you are actually going to be present and involved in destroying it. Does that give you a little different perspective on why you might want to understand who God's enemies are? Now, these 10 kings correspond to the 2 feet and 10 toes on that giant image of Daniel 2. Covered all that in detail. Since those toes, you'll recall, are also destroyed at Christ's second coming. They're smashed. The Roman Empire became divided between east and west. The 2 legs of that giant man there of Daniel 2. In all likelihood, therefore, the final resurrection of the Roman Empire will consist of 5 nations, 5 toes in Eastern Europe, and 5 nations, you could say 5 horns or toes, 5 nations in Western Europe, an eastern and a western foot. In Daniel 2:41 to 43, the feet and the toes are part of potter's clay and part of iron. So the kingdom shall be divided. It will not mix. The peoples are too different. The culture too different. Europe is going to form a union that is politically very fragile. It's clay, but it will be militarily powerful. That's the iron in it. It's also going to be, therefore, very short-lived, or what Revelation 17:12 called 1 hour.